Before we get into today's episode, I want to thank a couple sponsors that we were able to secure for this season, season 5 of the Scuttlebutt. It's exciting to be able to get sponsors for this. We're really thankful for them. The first one, you might have heard them already, is D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage. The Scuttlebutt's been pairing with D&D for quite some time. D&D began as a small hauling and used auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area in the late 1970s and has grown into a full-service metal recycling company with 2 locations, Lawrenceville and Tarentum. These are state-of-the-art scrap yards with deep roots in the community and a strong commitment to the service of their customers. D&D accepts all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous, that may be generated by industrial manufacturing, construction and demolition, small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. They have a wide variety of material handling equipment and are capable of managing any job in a timely and efficient manner. You can contact them for quotes and availability at D&D, that's D and D, autosalvage.com. Thank you, D&D, for supporting this podcast. Been wonderful collaborating with you, and we're looking forward to being with you all through season 5 here. We'd also like to thank a new sponsor for the Scuttlebutt, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. Tobacco-Free Adagio Health is dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use and increasing education about tobacco hazards and secondhand smoke. Of course, the best way to be tobacco-free is to never start. And we'll be sharing more about the many programs offered by Tobacco-Free Adagio Health in the future. You can check out more of their work at tobaccofree.adagiohealth. It's ADAGIO health.org. Tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. Really excited to have sponsors on board for the Scuttlebutt, and I hope you enjoy this upcoming episode.
It was that moment where I was like, oh, wow, like what I'm doing as an artist, it actually is important, and it directly affects people that I've never met, and gives them a little solace in like what their Marine was doing up to almost their last moments.
Welcome, everyone, to the Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club, whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Joining me for this coming episode will be longtime co-host Katherine Guyan. She's a newscaster out of Wheeling, West Virginia, also not a veteran, as well as myself. We're both not veterans. And a lot of what the Scuttlebutt has been is bringing you veteran stories so that we as civilians can sort of understand military culture. And we've had a long-running series of episodes about veterans and artists. And this is why I'm super excited for this particular episode. I recently came across a video interview of a Marine combat artist. Her name was Elize McKelvey. And I had no idea that you could go into the Marines and your MOS could be an artist, like actually drawing, painting, that you would go into combat zones and you would sketch on a pad. It was incredible to me, kind of blew my mind. So I reached out to Elise, and she happened to be a part of the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Joining me with Elise will be Kristopher Battles. He is the Marine Corps artist in residence at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Both incredible artists in their own right. And we dive into what is a combat artist. And this conversation is kind of similar to the conversation we had with Justin Merriman earlier on in the season, the war photographer. It's sort of a very different way to tell a story. Now, Justin's idea was, I want to get really specific. I want to find the quiet moments here. And they sort of, as artists, do the same thing, but they might witness it while out in the field. They're also, a big difference here is that Justin was a civilian and that they are trained Marines. You know, every Marine or rifleman, they are trained Marines and then put in, deployed, and then they sketch this art. And we found this, Katherine and I found this fascinating. So I think this is a really interesting conversation to have with these 2 incredible artists. We're going to bring up some of their art for them to be able to talk about. And so if you are listening to this as a podcast, you downloaded this and are listening on the way into work, pop over to YouTube and listen to the later half of the episode where we start to bring up some of their art on screen that they are able to give us sort of a more full story about how this art came to be, how they've grown as artists, what they are looking for, what type of impressions they're trying to leave, the story they're trying to tell. It's really interesting stuff, really, really cool. I just hope that if you're a new listener, you go back and you listen to some of our other episodes about artists and veterans and many of the other conversations that we've had, but also be sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. Leave us a comment, give us a review. It really helps us out. We really appreciate the support of all of our audience. So thank you so much for listening. And without further ado, our conversation with Elize McKelvey and Kristopher Battles, which is just a cool name to begin with, but enjoy.
My name is Kristopher Battles. I'm the artist in residence for the Marine Corps, and I work here at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. I have been a combat artist for 15 years, I suppose, 2006, but I was a Marine. I started out as a young Marine reservist. I enlisted at 17 with the permission of my parents, and I went to boot camp and turned 18 in boot camp. I was a reservist, and so I went to college as well during that time frame, and I did my normal, what we call drills for the reserve, which is the 1 weekend a month and the 2 weeks out of the year training in various places. I always saw combat art everywhere, which was a very good experience. The Marine Corps was very good even back then about putting prints out for the history. So for example, Colonel Waterhouse, who was the first artist in residence, did a whole series of paintings of Marine Corps history from 1775 all the way up through current day. Mm-hmm. So at least at that time. And so I saw those as a young Marine everywhere, and I was very inspired by them. I thought, what a great thing this is. And I didn't know that there was an art program or any kind of, I didn't know that. My recruiter never told me that. Unfortunately, I was a computer operator as a MOS at first, and then became a public affairs Marine in my reserve unit, which is a very good job too, by the way. But I didn't know there was an art program. I did eventually hear about this thing called combat artists because I met, when the Gulf War was happening, I met a combat artist that was coming through our unit doing some administrative thing, and then before going overseas. And so I found out there's a such thing as a combat artist. And I didn't think anything of it after that. I got out of the reserves in 1996. And then in 2005, I found this link on a website, a blog about this combat artist, Michael Fay, who was a warrant officer in the Marine Corps. He was over in Iraq, and he was doing combat art. I was very pleased. I emailed him and said, this is great, good job, this is wonderful. I'm glad they're doing the program. And I explained to him how I was a former Marine and a current artist. I was working at the time doing artwork. I was living in Florida, doing portraits and landscapes and that sort of thing. And finally developed my career to where I was full-time doing freelance artwork. And so he was pleased to know there was a former Marine that was an artist. And so he said, could we see your work? Well, one thing led to another, and I was interviewed by the director of the Marine Corps History Division, Colonel Camp, and I was interviewed by Charlie Groh, who was a former combat artist and was the art curator at the time. Mm-hmm. And he then became eventually our deputy director of the museum. But he had interviewed me, and they said, hey, would you be willing to re-enlist and come on board again? And I was 38 years old at the time, and I was okay. And I asked the wife, and and she was fine with it. And because she had been expeditionary, little story, we had met as missionaries in Haiti, and so she knew what it was like to be sort of deployed in a foreign environment where it wasn't necessarily always safe feeling necessarily. So she was okay with it, and so I enlisted 20 years, 1 month, and 1 day after I had originally enlisted. I rejoined the Marine Corps as a reservist and was mobilized to active duty, and came to Quantico. And within a month of coming to Quantico, I was over in Iraq doing a short-term deployment as a combat artist.
Okay.
What year was that?
Yeah.
What year was that, Chris?
So yeah,
2010.
In 2005, I met with Mike via email, and then kept correspondence up. Was interviewed in early 2006. Mm-hmm. All the paperwork was begun in January or February 2006. I re-enlisted in June, so June 28th of 2006. Came on board on reserve orders, RTO orders we call them, for training real quick for a month in August of 2006, and then reported full-time as a mobilized reservist on active duty to Quantico in September of 2006. And in October of 2006, I was in Iraq. That was quite a fast pace.
Yeah, that was a busy time in Iraq. And it was right before the surge.
Right, exactly. This was still a very troubling time. This was before the surge, and the Anbar awakening was just about to happen. As a matter of fact, it started happening right around that time period. And yeah, it was big time in Iraq at the time.
There's a lot more I want to dive into with all of this, but I also want to get to Elise. Elise, thank you also for joining the Scuttlebutt today. And if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, definitely. My journey kind of begins I didn't grow up in a military family. First of all, my grandpa actually served as an artist for the DoD, which I didn't know until I joined the Marine Corps. And my dad and my uncle were in the Army for a few years.
Mhm.
But other than that, there was no really military background.
That's a
So in
lot more
2000,
military background than many
well,
families. So
well, I guess so, but it wasn't like something we talked about. It wasn't something that influenced at all, like my upbringing. It was never like a prominent part. We were a very artistic family, though. However, so fast forward to art school, I went to the Art Institute of Boston, and in 2010, we had a class called the History of Illustration, and just for about 10 minutes during this class, they brought up something called combat art, and I was like, "What? What the heck is combat art? I never heard of this before." I instantly went home that night and started researching combat art, and I came across the Marine Corps Combat Art Program. Chris Battles' blog, as well as Mike Fay's blog, showed up. And I don't think it took me very long to start cold calling all these people asking, how do I get into this program? I don't know what it is that is drawing me towards this, pun intended, but I need to be a part of this. And I remember Mike Fay telling me, make sure that you want to join the Marine Corps to be a Marine first and an artist second. So for 2 years, I was really battling this decision. At first, I was going to go officer because that's what you do when you have a college degree. But I felt that my best route was going enlisted because if I wanted to share the Marine Corps' story, I really wanted to experience it from that ground level on up. And I felt personally that I couldn't properly tell these stories if I just went straight onto the officer side, especially with not being hugely in a military family. So in 2012, I graduated college. I went to boot camp, and the journey continues. I serve in the Marine Corps, and then the program at that time, as Chris can attest to, wasn't there was some changes going on in the administrative side, so the program didn't have a lot of funding for a few years there after Chris's deployments. And in I think Charlie Groves 2015 restarted the combat art program, and I had been doing art on the side, practicing on my own, doing what I thought you were supposed to do as a combat artist, sketching on location. But really, I had no idea. I didn't have much of a mentorship side yet. So in 2016, Charlie brought me on, or 15, he brought me on into the program officially. And that's when I really started to get to work with Chris, other artists like Victor Uhas, Richard Johnson, and then there was a male officer, CJ Captain Ballman, who represented the officer side, and I was kind of the enlisted. And that's kind of how we are now. We've done a few deployments under the program, a lot of training opportunities, covering training operations, because it's not just combat that we cover. We cover everything from the day-to-day life to the fast-paced stuff. But that's kind of where we are today.
I think, Catherine, you can agree with me on this, is that we felt the same way as you, Elise, whenever we found out about combat artists. We were like, wait, what? Like, when I saw your video on Military Times, Elise, and we'll put the link here on the video. It's a great interview, and it was something that really blew my mind, not only because your art and Chris's art are just so catching, they're so interesting. They really capture, these pieces of humanity. And before on the Scuttlebutt, we've had on war photographers, and that's sort of what you mainly think of. I myself as a civilian think of when I think of how do we capture moments in the military. I think of photographer. I wouldn't think that we would have a program in the Marine Corps for artists. So what is combat artistry for people who may be watching this that have never heard about it? How did it start, and why does the Marine Corps have it?
I can go like my take on it. I think Chris is a lot more knowledgeable in terms of the history of it, but we've been around since, it was in 1942 is when the program officially was established. So we have work in our collection going all the way back to World War II, essentially. And obviously at that time, photography wasn't as prominent. A huge part of sharing stories and connecting civilians to what the service members are doing on the front lines was through art. as the years go on, photography becomes more involved, and us as artists also adapt it. We'll take photos on location if we just can't sketch quick enough, or if it's an area where maybe we can't have photography and we can only have our sketchbooks, so they kind of go hand in hand. But the Marine Corps is huge on tradition, and this program is the history of the Marine Corps. So having artists share the stories of Marines is very important to who we are. And every service has a different version of what combat art is. The thing that sets the Marine Corps aside is it's always been Marines sharing Marine stories. Now, today we do have civilians who have proven themselves as what they call themselves war artists, who have really been a part of the program for many, many years. And we trust sharing the stories of the Marine Corps, but they still have to witness these events from a first person's perspective. We don't just take photographs off the internet, paint a picture without witnessing ourselves. There's a few situations where we'll do historical paintings, but for the most part, it's first person perspective.
And I want to know how those are selected, but I figured I'd get a little bit more history rounded out. Chris?
Oh, sure. Well, she was very correct. We started officially in 1942. General Robert Denig, basically the entire public relations, was Division of Public Relations started at that time officially, and he was called from retirement and started what they called Denig's Demons, and they were combat correspondents, combat photographers, and combat artists mainly. And so you had this whole idea was to report back to the country what the Marines and it was Army as well and had their programs, but for us it was to report back to America what the Marines were doing, because General Denig said this is a people's war and they have a right to know what's going on. And so he also decided to have several different branches of this. You have, traditionally with the photography and the journalism and things like that, but he also valued the traditional rendering, the illustration and combat art, because reportage art is what we are in a way. And we are, as Elise said, it's a first person account. So you have to go and experience these things and then create, after visualizing it, seeing it, experiencing, processing it through your artistic sensibility, your filter, whatever you call it, all of your background, and then you put it down on canvas and paper, and people will naturally relate to it a lot. There's just something very relatable about artwork that some other media doesn't have. We like
that. A huge question we always get is why art in the age of photography? But I always, why do people go to museums then if it's all about one way to document? I think every way of documenting has its place, whether it's writing, photo, art. You don't want to discount one whole genre of medium just because maybe there's a quicker way to express something. Also with art, it's pretty cool because you can witness a scene as the artist, and you can take the key moments from that entire scene and put them into one image and share that story collectively in one format, rather than as a photographer, once you snap that photo, that's it.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, that's go ahead, Chris, and then I'll ask my question.
I was just going to say, a lot of times people say, well, photographs don't lie. Well, in a way, they kind of sometimes do, or they can have things that get in the way of telling the truth. We are able, as Elise said, we're able to compress time. We're able to tell a narrative specifically. We're able to filter out certain unnecessary things. Like sometimes you can take a photograph and what is that thing in front of that person or whatever? It's something blocked the shot, or you didn't take it at the right time, and you can't show the picture. You can't tell the truth in a way just from the snapshot as well as you can with the artistic, taking the time and crafting the narrative and the composition for whatever drama or whatever. So we have a value in that. It's much more. It's both emotional and cerebral, and we can communicate, and I think on a deeper level.
Yeah, and just I've also noticed because my primary job in the Marine Corps was actually photography, graphic design, and then the combat art was a secondary job, something I did when time fit. But I found that I was attached to an infantry unit for a year, and I was taking photos of them for about 6 months working up to a deployment. And not a lot of them came up and talked to me, it was a little awkward. But the minute I took my sketchbook out, all of a sudden I was surrounded by all these Marines, super curious, what are you doing? And instantly, just like that, I was part of the crew. I think maybe it was the camera was a barrier between me and them, and they felt everybody knows what a camera is and what it does. It's very accurate, right? But they were very curious about the sketchbook and there's so many photos of artists in our program surrounded by whether it's Afghan children or Marines or just people super curious, and it just goes to show how unique drawing on location is and sharing stories.
So what's that process like then to create something like this? Because obviously, you know, I looked through your work before this, and you know, you have it behind you right now, and I can see it. It's so detailed, and there's color to it, and life. And I was looking at a couple of them on the internet, and I had to do a double take. I was like, is this a photograph or is this a sketch? Because it was that realistic. So obviously these things take time to develop that kind of detail. So like, what's the process like? Because obviously something as detailed as what you do can't always be done in the moment that you witness it. So, you know, talk to us a little bit about that process of like sketching on location versus if you are able to like add more detail once you have more time. Like, how does the process itself work to create one of these amazing pieces?
Chris, I think you're way more detailed than me, so you have a really good process.
Well, this also gets to the idea, and General Denning had this idea: send out as many different artists as you can, of course. So we also we do like to be realists. A lot of times we are naturalists and we are realists as far as what how you would classify us as artists. But we also like expressive artwork. We like sketchy things. So I try to balance. I'm trying to get a little bit more loose in my techniques, and I try to do a lot more color studies and sketches. So not every artist has the same process. So I want to stress that we try to get as many different artistic, you know, people, lenses, or whatever you want to call them. Each individual artist has a different style. So Elise will do a certain way, CJ will do a certain way, Richard Johnson, Victor, Jim Butcher, different people we have. They all have a different method. But I think generally speaking, we all go as sketch artists and we take photographs. But our focus is capture as much as we can with your sketches and with your photographs, and we even journal. Some of us will journal, we'll write down people's names and events, and you know, even perhaps little bits of the weather and different things like that, the lighting, whatever it is, things of note that when we get back to the studio, we can remember, refresh our memory, and then it helps sometimes. It also, I've had, from my journal, I've been able to contact the individual that was there even and say, do you have any more photographs or anything like this? Or what exactly were you doing in that area when I met you that one time? And they'll give more information. So it's relationships, it's the sketches are very valuable, and any kind of visual reference you can gather, it's very valuable. Then you take that back. Well, some artists also though will paint in watercolor or some sort of color painting process that's quick, and you can do a little pochade box, as they say, a little painting box, and take it with you. It all has to be portable, and that's why a lot of times we're doing mainly sketches in theater, and then we come back to the studio and do paintings. But my process is go with my sketch pad. Sometimes I'll take a watercolor pad, do as much on site as I can, take as many photographs as I can, talk to people, write down notes, and then come back. And sometimes there's a studio in theater that you can work at, in an office on a fob somewhere, or sometimes it's mainly waiting until you get back from deployment to the studio. And then you take the time to think about it and create a little more of the more fine art, you know, studio art things that tell the story, perhaps in a more traditionally fine art way than reportage sketches.
Yeah, we went to Iraq, myself, Chris wasn't there with us. It was myself and a few other artists. And this was one of my first experiences being with artists that I deem mentors to me, or like way farther along in their artistic journeys than I am. And it was an opportunity for me to see how they approach situations, learn from them, but then also I was able to act as the Marine sort of liaison, connecting them to certain areas because they were just civilians. And when you see a Marine, you're automatically more trusting. Whereas when you see a civilian artist, you might be like, oh, who are you exactly? So
or someone
really
from the Air Force or Navy.
Yeah, like, someone from another branch. Yeah. But I remember sketching and drawing. We were there for only 2 weeks, and our whole goal was to get as much done as we could before coming back to the United States. And so we spent a few nights, all-nighters, just drawing while everything was as fresh as it was in our memories. And then we were able to have this like almost like an art gallery showing all the commands out there as a morale booster for them to see like, hey, your job is important. You might have just been working on this computer and in your mind it's like, oh, it's just another day. But the minute it turns into a sketch, all of a sudden you have a rejuvenated viewpoint on what it is you do, and that it actually is important and it's worth documenting. And so we were able to show these sketches and paintings, some paintings, but like Chris said, most of those are done in the rear, like in the studio. But it also allowed us to connect with them more and hopefully, like a tumbleweed, have more trips down the line with artists. And so when people are planning, whether it's deployments or training, they'll think, oh, right, there were those artists that one time. Their work was really cool. We want them to come out with us in the future. So that's a huge part of the purpose right now as well.
One thing that you said that I want to circle back to is that you said you thought you were doing what a combat artist was supposed to do. How did you, what were you doing that you thought you were supposed to do, and how did that transfer to what you should be doing, or what an actual combat artist is?
So for those from 2010 essentially until 2015, late 2015, I hadn't really seen any of these other artists and what they do on location, how they approach situations, drawing from life, because drawing movement in itself is very hard. And you have gesture drawing classes. I had a bachelor degree in illustration, but drawing Marines, and especially people that might not necessarily want you to draw them, or like are a little like hesitant for you to draw them at first, was all new for me. And it was just me out there with a bunch of Marines with my sketchbook, and it was very nerve-wracking. And so I just, basically what I'm saying is I had to try and approach this on how I thought maybe the other artists approached it. And that was just taking my sketchbook around and drawing when I could. I had done a lot of research into the program, so I knew what it was that they were looking for. And my setback at that time was my skill set just wasn't quite there yet. And the only way to get better at art and drawing is to keep doing it. So that was my main focus. And then when the program was reestablished, I was like able to actually see how these artists really did approach, and their confidence in going into situations, which I found was they weren't equally as confident as I was. We were all very hesitant. I thought like I had everyone up on a pedestal in my mind, and like they created the perfect sketch every single time their pencil touched the paper. And I learned that wasn't the case. And there might be 30 drawings of somebody with no arm because they moved away really quick, and then you had to wait for a Marine to replace them so you could finish the sketch, or you just move on to another one. All these things that as a young artist, I thought everyone was perfect, and then I was the only one struggling. But I learned that everyone struggles.
Well, here's one thing I want to say about this. So Elise manifested this notion of a vocation. It's almost like a calling. And so you have to have it in you. There's something about being a combat artist or a war artist, whether you're military or civilian. To be an effective one, you have to have a certain sort of operating system within you already. You have to have a certain amount of talent and certain amount of trainability, certain amount of flexibility, but you have to have in you this notion of you already kind of have an understanding. And so at least she may say, oh, I didn't really know, but she was already practicing that which she needed to do. She just didn't know, she didn't have any feedback. And so that was what was great about when she got with Richard and Victor and CJ, and to be mentored and to see them in action. And that's what I love about going out with some of these older artists, or very experienced artists, I should say, is that you can get a refreshing notion of how things are done and how things are, hey, everybody makes mistakes, and you can say, oh, wow, okay, good. So I don't have to feel less confident. I'm growing, I'm maturing, they're helping me, we're all a team. And so, but you do have to have in you a sense of a higher calling almost, because you're going into an environment that is challenging, emotionally challenging, mentally challenging, vocationally or talent challenging, and you have to create these things, and hopefully there'll be something that people want to look at and to be of value to the country and to people who have relatives in the service or they have been in the service. But you do have to have that sort of operating system in you to really be effective.
And there has to be a sort of history of an artistic bent, understanding of that. And you can't just accept somebody into this that can draw really good stick figures. Like
right.
There has to be,
right.
you know.
And they can, we've seen people, of course, in certain parts of military art, sometimes you'll see a person who may have been trained at a certain school but they've got a very rigid, you know, realistic, oh, look, I'm crafting, it looks exactly like the photograph, which is good. But sometimes you need that sort of, there's a looseness and a flexibility that person might not have either emotionally, or they can't get out of the studio setting, right? So you need someone who's able to take that studio method and sort of throw it over their shoulder and go and get in the dirt and sketch and make mistakes and, you know, keep going and get sweat and blood and whatever on your dirt on your, you know, sketchbook, right? And then really come back with these things and go, okay, here I have, this is what I produced. Some people just don't really understand that method, or they don't do well with that method, but we try to find the people that do.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how you guys choose what moments that you capture, because I find this when I speak with photographers, or I'm a journalist myself, so I capture things through video. You know, when you're out and you're deployed or you're with a unit, there's a lot going on all the time and you're seeing a lot of things. But when I look at your, you know, your work, it's all focused on what seems like very specific moments. So how do you pick which moments you want to capture? Because they're, you know, they seem like they're so specific, almost like you froze time for an instant. Is it like a feeling where you see something happen and you say, oh, this is it right here? Like, how do you pick what moment actually, you know, ends up as the finished piece?
Oh man.
Well, this gets to that sort of unknowable, you know, you got to trust your instinct a bit. You also, okay, so one thing as artists, we are seers in a sense. We are, and I don't mean that in some sort of magical, mystical way, but there is mysticism to it. We have to be open to what's going around visually. We have to be connected. We have to, in a sense, be empaths, I guess. So we're always looking around. And so let's say you're on a patrol, and I think Mike Fay has talked about this a bit. So you're on a patrol, your head's on a swivel anyway. You've got your weapon, you've got your everything. You're geared up like a Marine. If you're a civilian, you're still there with the platoon, and you probably have a helmet on and a flak jacket, as we call it, body armor. And your head is on a swivel for security's sake. And so as a Marine artist, for example, you're doing your work as a Marine, you're doing your job as a Marine, you're trying to be an asset to the patrol and not be a liability. But you're also looking around visually, waiting for that moment, because you're looking for that moment, and you may or may not plan out what you want to do. Sometimes we will talk with the curators and they'll say, well, we don't have anything on artillery, we don't have anything on tanks, or we don't have anything on whatever. And so you can go into a theater, a theater of operations, and have in mind, you know, a plan, and that's good, and it's always great to do that. But a lot of times, as all plans do, they go out the window when you actually get in the theater, because restrictions happen that you didn't foresee, or opportunities happen that you didn't foresee, and so you have to be willing to go, okay, we've got it, there's a flight leaving, whatever, there's a convoy taking off, we got a permission, the sergeant major said this, so we get on there, we go, and then you're just always waiting and watching. So you do have to be you have to have another subset of skills, which is watching and waiting for that opportunity.
Yeah, I've also found that, like, when I'm in whether it's a training operation or what have you, that pretty much every moment has a way that you could interpret it to make a good art piece. And you look for maybe compositions of, maybe there's a Marine, like Chris's painting in the background, where it's the Marine rock, paper, scissors with the Afghan children, and it's very like silhouetted, which is great for a composition. And there were actually other children around that, right, Chris? And you kind of took them out
for the
just to focus in on that moment. But like, there's so many moments. Maybe we're on a flight and we're in the back of the helicopter, the Osprey, and there's just Marines sitting there drenched in sweat, and they're like half falling asleep. And you might sit there and think, oh, this is just a flight. But as an artist, we're like, oh, that's like a real moment that we want to capture. That's something that every Marine looking back will be able to connect to, because we've all been on those flights sweating with our flak jackets and like 110-degree heat. So I almost look at these situations like everything has potential. Right. And then maybe back in the studio after I do sketches, which the sketches are usually situations that the Marine's not moving as much. Maybe they're holding security, or we have tried to draw Marines while walking. It's challenging, and they don't turn out very well. But most of the moments on location are those. We try to look for those areas where they might be doing something repetitive, like cleaning their rifle or tank maintenance, things that we know even if that Marine goes away and another one comes, like the scene will relatively be the same. But then going back into the studio, we'll look at everything as a whole and reassess what would make a good painting and what wouldn't. But everything, going back to what I said earlier, everything is important no matter what you're doing, whether it's you're on a computer or fixing a helicopter. There's always something within that sequence that would make a good art piece.
Well, it seems like too, Elise, you mentioned earlier about how you wanted to be able to understand what the Marines were going through before you really, got into the art side of it. It seems like and I love this, you're talking about moments that when you think about the military in a traditional sense that like us as civilians may not think about, but if you're somebody in the military looking at your work, those are moments that matter to people who are veterans or people who are currently enlisted. And I love that like your art is kind of like by the Marines for the Marines,
Yeah, definitely. I think, if you've never served in the military, you might have a certain idea of what it is that we do. And our job as artists is to show all those other moments as well and paint a bigger picture of who we are and what our day-to-day lives are and how those impact future situations. And also, like as artists, we've depicted things that we thought maybe at the time weren't important. Like I remember covering a female tanker in this was a training op in 29 Palms, California. And at that time I was like, oh, this is cool, a female tanker. There'll be many more of these down the line. And then we got rid of the tank platoon. So there we are, like capturing a moment that will literally most likely never happen again. And so that's why you have to keep your eyes open for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. And one of the things also that's valuable about what we do is we see ourselves as recording history. We're reaching today's people, right? Today's Marines, today's sailors, today's families of those people, right? We're reaching those, but we're also painting something for the future so they'll look back. And a lot of the scenes that are valuable to us are scenes that, Marines can relate to. I have Vietnam veterans come in and they'll see a scene from a FOB today and relate to it, or vice versa. I'll see Marines come in from current day and see an older scene and relate to it because there's so much commonality in the experience of the Marine. And the equipment may change, the uniforms may change, but the attitude's the same, the experience was the same. And it's a great unifier. And I don't know how it honors them and it keeps us together emotionally, I suppose.
One thing that we asked our war photographer, and maybe it's a bit different, and correct me if I'm wrong, is he was a civilian who was embedded. Part of our questions to him was, why would you put yourself in this very dangerous situation to capture these, very brief moments to tell this story? But both of you having been enlisted as Marines, there's that sort of acceptance, like I'm going to be put into a combat situation or I could be put into danger. But how do you keep your artist cap on when you find yourself in a position of danger or combat?
It is something that's unique. I mean, people, you're, as Mike Fay said, you're a Marine first and an artist second. So you must be an asset to the platoon and the Marines. You also must survive. So you must do your job well as a Marine first. And if you're a civilian artist, you must also make sure that you're a liability, you're an asset.
Not a liability.
Make sure you're an asset, not a lot of liability. And you also must, of course, survive and get this image to the people. And I guess it's the value of the images that people, we all as human beings have in us, I believe, a certain sense of that there is a meta narrative. There is something that's higher than just banal everyday life. And that's why even some of those pictures we draw of the banal, commonplace, slice of life things can be very valuable. Because we see sometimes these deeper subtexts and sub narratives, and we try to portray some of these things. And I think some of the most valuable things we do are maybe even quickly done or expressively done, but they touch on some of these things that are greater than just what's depicted or greater than every day. And there's something in us that needs that. And I think artists sometimes are more tuned into that already. But that maybe is what drives an artist to do it, because there's a sense of something greater than yourself. And that's what causes people to serve in the first place, to serve the military. There's something greater than yourself. There's something worth serving and perhaps even dying for. So you go out and you do it.
Yeah, I remember when Mike said that to me on the phone, like, make sure you're joining the Marine Corps because you want to be a Marine. And artist comes, that it took me 2 years to really decide that and think, like, you know, do I just want to have this adrenaline rush as an artist that seems so out there, or do I actually want to be a Marine and earn that title? And I really wanted to earn that title Marine. And I almost joined under a contract that was like something way out in left field. Like, at least when I did join, I ended up being graphic artist photographer, which was as close as I could get to what I thought combat artist was. Because remember, at that time, the program didn't have any more funding. So when I joined the Marine Corps, there was no option to be officially under the combat artist program. And I really had to be like, okay, yeah, I actually do want to join the Marine Corps to be a Marine, and I want to earn that title and be a really good Marine, and eventually be in charge of Marines. And I have this whole life as what it is in the Marine Corps, but then I also have this passion as an artist and storytelling and all of that. But yeah, you're definitely 100% a Marine. You train like a Marine, you go through boot camp just like Marines do, and like, you are.
And that's what they say, right? Every Marine a rifleman. So it sort of starts there and then can branch.
Definitely. Yeah. So that if like the art went away, like, you would still be happy with where you are in the Marine Corps, and just have just as much of a calling to serve as you do as an artist. So I think that's what makes our stories so strong too, or like our ability to share these stories, is because we do have such a connection to what it is that we're talking about.
Well, speaking of stories, I have to ask you guys my favorite question that I ask every like journalist, photographer, and especially artist that I meet, which is like, I guess it can be a two-way answer. What is maybe perhaps your favorite like work that you've done, or like favorite story that you have about like something you saw and like the process to capture it? Because I feel like with the way you guys do your art, because it's so unique, perhaps like the story behind a piece may be in some ways almost like better, or, you know, more interesting than the piece itself. Not that any of your pieces would be intriguing, but you know what I mean? Like, sometimes the story to get there is just as much a part of the work of art.
I think you nailed it, actually.
Yeah, but I mean, and everybody always hates when I ask that question too, and I hate it when I get it as a journalist. Like, what's your favorite story? Because it's like, how do you pick a favorite? But like, when I ask you that, like, what would be the first piece or something that comes to your mind?
Yeah, well, for me, I always go back to 2015, when this was my deployment with a MU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and this was my first experience where I was like gonna do what I thought, again, what combat art was supposed to be, and like, how do I approach these situations? And I remember I was with this infantry unit for a year, and on like day 2 of our deployment, our Osprey crashes, and 2 of those Marines pass away, unfortunately. And because I was with this unit, I had both photos and all these sketches that I was able to compile and do like these memorial portraits and all this work that I was able to give to the family. And it was that moment where I was like, oh, wow, like, what I'm doing as an artist, it actually is important, and it directly affects people that I've never met, and gives them a little solace in like what their Marine was doing up to almost their last moments. And so that moment was always like a stepping block for me to really go all in on what it was that we do. And then everything else is just like, everything's great. And I always say like, my favorite piece is my next, because I'm all in on whatever I'm doing at that moment, for me personally.
Chris, do you have a favorite piece?
Well, it is hard to choose, because I have several that are really, really, I find fascinating or emotionally satisfying. One of the ones that I always point to, it is still one of my favorites, if not my favorite that I've ever done. It's called A Little Light Reading, and it's here in the museum. It's on the wall in the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation offices, so people can see it here still. but it's a picture of Marines that are gathered around. It's in the morning. It's a little bit cold. They're reading little novels and magazines they've just gotten in the mail from back home. And so it's this great little slice of life in a fob. And it's gotten so much positive relatability to it. People have told me that they relate to it. And I find that kind of a story is powerful. So, and also it just was funny how it came about, because I was in this little fob. It was a really small, that's a forward operating base. This was really a patrol base. It was a very small, basically a wide spot in a road where they had these things called HESCO barriers filled with sand, and it made the little sort. It was like a little fort, and in there they had a little places where they slept, places where they ate, a little sort of outdoor living area. And these Marines were out there. I came out of this little improvised chow hall, and I saw these Marines sitting there. I see it, the image right here. And I saw the light sort of coming through the cami netting and the glow and the different things. And I saw this scene that seemed almost Rockwellian. And I said, I've got to capture this. So I got my camera as quick as I could. I sketched a few of the Marines. I took photographs. I talked with them a bit about what was going on. And this is also a moment where people who weren't there can relate to it, because this kind of scene was replicated throughout Iraq and Afghanistan, that Marines over the course of a decade can relate to, who were over there. And so it isn't a combat scene. It's not, in that sense, exciting or anything like that. But it is still heartfelt and a very kind of memorable moment for a lot of people, that expresses to a lot of people what life was like over there.
I feel like I've heard so many times from people that like how important those moments were when like you get mail and like you're able to read like those books from home, or those letters and things like that, or even like I saw the one gentleman reading a newspaper. Like I've heard from so many veterans about how important that time was to have, those moments where you can like read something. So that's, I love that.
Well, Elise, I wanted to touch on the fact that are you the only female combat artist from the Marine Corps? Was there one prior to you, or anyone that you looked up to when you came in?
There's been a few female combat artists. One I can think of off the top of my head is Lieutenant Colonel Donna Neary. I think she was in the reserves, right, Chris?
Yes.
I met her. We do a combat art symposium every year where we bring people in, previous combat artists and artists from other branches and such. And I met her about 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember she was actually one of the people I also talked to in college, being like, how do I get to where you are? And everyone I talked to was very supportive and helped me get onto the trajectory of where I am today. But there's not a lot of us, but I mean, there's not a lot of female Marines either. So if you're taking what's already a small group, chunking it down into an even smaller, there's only been about 353 combat artists, Chris?
Well, I'm 7, so
357. So there hasn't been a lot, like less than 400 of us since 1942. So I mean,
you're the fewer the prouder.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I mean, when you join the Marine Corps, you already know you're not going to be in the majority. So, and then if you're joining the Marine Corps as an artist, you're already okay with going down the path of less traveled. So it's pretty used to it, I guess.
You mentioned being out in the field and doing sketching. Now, I would think, our war photographer talked about, when I was embedded, it took a while to like gain the trust of those who I was embedded with. You already being a Marine and coming in and then starting these sketches, you mentioned that like they sort of were a bit skeptical of it, but then they saw the art. Of course, the sketches that you do, we'll bring them up in a bit. For those audience members who are listening, please pop over to YouTube and you'll be able to see some of this. We'll also have links to Instagram and Pinterest for both Chris and Elise. But talk a bit about like being with the unit and then starting to draw within that unit. Me as an artist, like I don't want anybody watching me, work, but like, how is that process, sort of integrated into the unit?
For me, going in like as a Lance Corporal into a unit of Marines I've never met, I don't break out my sketchbook at all for as long as I can. And I do things like sign up for Firewatch, which is something you have to do as a Marine, or help carry the water. Like, make yourself an asset, you know, somebody important around the camp. You're not just there to cover what they're doing. You're also there to help and move things along. So it took a while, but sometimes we're in situations where we need to gain their trust really quick. But I would say it takes at least a week of sketching and like doing artwork before they're like, oh, you're kind of cool, we want you out with us on this. But it definitely doesn't happen right away.
Now, I always joke, it's kind of like Jane Goodall with the apes, you know? She's got to hang around in the periphery and slowly move closer. And
Yeah.
you got to build the trust, you know? Not everybody can be Marine Corps infantry, and it is a definite society and a band of brothers. It really is. And so you have to gain trust, and you have to make them understand that you're one of the people. And it does help, of course, that they know that you're a trained Marine. But whether you're civilian or Marine, it does take a while. But as Elise said, when you start sketching and they start saying, hey, Frank, look at this, you know, or whatever, they start saying, oh, and they realize that you know, the Marine Corps has cared enough to send somebody that, wow, this is an actual MOS, or this is, people do this. And so that it spreads like wildfire. And the next thing you know, you're popular. You can, you know, you've proven you can carry your weight, and you're also kind of special. So
Yeah.
they see immediately the value of your talent in telling the story.
And you certainly both have an incredible amount of talent. I'll get to something in a second. Elise, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's pretty interesting because online, you'll see people read our stories or like see the word combat art, and they'll instantly be like, what is that? Like, that they don't understand, and you'll get people like giving you negative feedback for sure. But on location and having a sketchbook, I've never had any issues in my entire Marine Corps career, and now with people being like rude or anything like that. People really like resonate with it once they actually see it. And it's tough because you want everyone, even if they've never seen a combat artist or like been a part of it, to like understand what it is. But a lot of times you just have to like be there to really understand. And as an artist, you can't hide a sketchbook. Like, if you're taking photos, you can kind of like shoot from the hip, as I like to say, which I did a lot as a photographer in the Marine Corps. I was like, do, like, okay, run away. But as a sketchbook sketch artist, you can't really hide your sketchbook. So at some point, you just have to accept that people are going to see your unfinished sketches, and they're going to ask questions. And there's no easy way to get better at that except just to like put yourself in those uncomfortable spots, for sure.
Chris, I want to show one of the pieces of art that you've done that I pulled from the internet. This is less on base, I think, and more out in the field. So I'm interested to hear the process of sketching out in the field with foreigners who may have never met an artist before.
Now this is an oil sketch of mine. Now, I didn't do this on location, but this is actually also one of my favorites, just color-wise and process-wise. But it's also a universal sort of meta-narrative. So they're watching us, fascinated with these creatures coming from overseas, and this is Afghanistan. And so they're watching these Marines come by, and just, you know, it's almost like a spectator sport for these kids. And I just was touched by that, because everybody knows what it's like to be a kid. Kids are universal. They're not burdened by a lot of perhaps political things or geopolitical struggles. It does affect them in their local lives, of course, but it's a universal story, and it's a heart-touching story. So I couldn't help but want to paint this. As an artist too, just expressive painting is fun, and colorful painting is fun. But it gave me a chance to be more expressive with you know, some of its palette knife and some of its, you know, dragging color across a layer of previous color, and it's letting paint meld in. It's a little expressionistic, a little bit impressionistic, but it tells a narrative, so it doesn't abandon the narrative for the sake of formal painting quality. So it has both fun paint and interesting story.
There's a lot of technique that you sort of just that you went over here, and I had written down in my notes of. I'm guessing this was not near the beginning of your time as an artist. I'm guessing you grew into this level of art. And how do you grow as an artist, as a combat artist, I guess?
Well, like Elise said, you have to just kind of do it. There's no way to get around it. There's no shortcut. So, and I always say, I have my master's degree now, But I got it with the new GI Bill, and I was very fortunate to be allowed to go and get my master's degree with what we call permissive TAD while I was on active duty, and the new GI Bill paid for almost all of it, so it was a wonderful program. But I always like to say that my actual master's program in painting happened in the Marine Corps on active duty, doing artwork full time. My work progressed, exponentially over the course of that several years, So it was an intensive master's program in sketching and painting and even sculpture. That I would have not had the opportunity to do if it hadn't been for the Marine Corps putting me on active duty.
I know that you have to leave here in just a couple of minutes, Chris. So before you pop off the podcast, I wanted to ask you about the museum, what the mission is there, how a combat artist could come into it. Give us sort of an overview of somebody who might want to come and see a lot of this art.
Oh, good deal. Well, we at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, we're here in Quantico, Virginia. We're right off of 95, and we're open every day of the year except for Christmas. And the only restrictions I think we have now are that masks are required, but please feel free to come on in. There's a great art gallery with a wonderful show by Mary White, some watercolors of veterans from all 50 states. I highly recommend that show. There is all the wonderful exhibits we have going on. There's even some construction back on the other side of the hallway over here for the new exhibits that are going to be opening soon. So they can come in, they can see us working. Our studio here has these big windows, and so I've had to get used to people seeing me work all the time now. But they can come and knock on the door if it's not open, or walk in if it's open, and I'd be glad to chat with them. Elise will chat with them. We can talk about what we do. You can see work in process, and that's a fascinating thing too.
Mm-hmm. How many people are there? There are a lot of Marines like Elise that come in and develop their works there?
We don't have as many as we have had in the past. Right now, we have some people that are stationed in other places, but we have what we call also a second Saturday event. So every second Saturday of the month, we have people, anybody that's around can come in, whether they're civilian or Marines, and come in at like 10 a.m. in the morning. And it's just a 2 or 3 hour event. We will have a subject matter. For example, sometimes we've had people pose in Marine Corps gear. And so we'll do a traditional sketching figure drawing class with gesture drawings all the way up to longer figure drawings. We've had lessons in sculpture, how to build an armature, how to start doing things, how to do certain parts of it, all sorts of things about any kind of artist related thing. So, and also we have a symposium once a year where we draw in combat artists from the Air Force, the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and civilian artists as well. And we sort of compare our best practices, as they say, and share our experiences from the year. And that's a great thing too. But we are open as a studio every day. So
yeah, and we have our Facebook and Instagram pages, USMC Combat Art, which, if somebody watching this is like, well, that's interesting, and they have an epiphany moment like we had before we were part of the program, they can reach out to us there as well, through Messenger, or hop on over to the museum and talk to Chris. But we're pretty prominent online and in person, so it shouldn't be too hard to find us. Yeah.
Right.
I love the education component that you guys are bringing, because like Sean and I both said, I mean, I did not even know that combat art existed. And now I know so much more about it after like seeing the incredible work that you guys do and speaking to both of you. So I love that, people are able to come see you and talk to you and interact. And that's such like a, at least you mentioned it, like a learning thing, and people may be sparked to have the same love of it that you guys do. And I think that's an incredible mission within itself, is to continue to educate the public about what you guys do.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Well, at least I want to get to some of your art as well, and have you tell us a couple stories about anything. But what I'd like to do is actually bring up your Instagram. It's filled with a lot of your art, a lot of your sketches, and let's pop over to there now. How did you pick your ink stick art?
That was around the same time when I learned about the combat art program. And like I said, I didn't have a military background. So when I was looking up terminology of the Marine Corps, they kept referring to a pen as an ink stick. And I was like, oh, at this time, all I drew in was ink. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm going to start calling myself Ink Stick Art. So for years before I was even in the Marine Corps, I started going by that online, and it's just kind of stuck. It's a part of who I am now. I can't change it.
Yeah. Is there a particular one that you have a story behind? Boy, this is why I would think that, you're sitting in the unit and you start sketching and somebody walks past and thinks, oh, she's probably just drawing something. And then they see this and they're like, what?
Yeah. I like to, like, when I do bring a sketchbook out, I've learned that I always try to have a few finished sketches in there so that if I am drawing early on and I feel like I'm losing their interest, I can flip back to these more finished drawings and be like, yeah, this is what it'll look like. I promise you. It'll look really cool in the end. And so you can kind of regain their interest. This was a sketch of.
This is behind you as well here in your.
Yeah, this is behind me. So that's a Quantico, Virginia, Camp Upshur. And this was in the chow hall where the refugees were getting their food, and this lady was handing out these big oranges to all the kids, and they were falling everywhere, and it was quite comical. And then so I did sketch that moment, and then I took that moment and made it more of a finished little painting here. But that was one of the.
Did you paint right over this sketch then? So you had the outline, or did you paint on the other like?
Yeah, so I have the sketch that I did on location, which is actually in the Combat Art collection now, and that sketch is just the girl. There was no worker there handing out the oranges, and I was looking back at my photos and sketches, and I was thinking, wow, I missed an opportunity of like a connection. So I redid the sketch, put the lady into it, and then turned that into. I painted right over that sketch, but the initial on location sketch is archived in the collection now, so they'll have that forever, and then this will get submitted at a later date.
It's all incredibly detailed.
Yeah, a lot of these are, when I left the Marine Corps, I wanted to explore more with mediums, and so I've used a lot of pastels and charcoal and colored pencil in the last 7-8 months, but most of my location sketches are in this Prisma colored pencil. One of my art mentors, Victor Uhas, would always draw in blue pencil, and I was like, why are you using a blue pencil instead of black? And he told me, he's like, because black is so permanent, and it can be really scary to have something like that because you can't erase Prismacolor. It's there once the line is down, but if you use a blue pencil, it's a little less strenuous on your eyes, and you have a little more confidence as an artist going in. You can always go back over it with a black pencil if you wanted, but that's why you see a lot of blue sketches. This is actually a digital painting of a training op in 29 Palms, California. And this is one of those situations where it was a sequence of events where the Osprey at the top flew in, the LAV came in behind it, and the Marines came out of there, assessed. This was a practice on how to handle casualties or injured Marines, and then they put them in the Osprey, and the Osprey flew away. But that was a 15-20 minute training op, and I decided to take all those moments and put it into one image so that you can see like what they did. But that actual event, was compressed into what you see.
That's amazing. The depth of it too, I found like really striking, like how the gentleman at the front is so much, I guess, like his color's deeper than the one in the background. It kind of shows some depth. It's great.
Yeah, I really like painting digitally because it gives me more freedom. There's not a supplies issue, digital is endless. But when I graduated art school, I was thinking I'll never do traditional work. I thought I was going to be like a concept artist for movies or TV, and I was just going to do digital forever. And then when I learned about the program and realized that it's all traditional, I was like, oh, wow, I don't do this at all. So I started practicing my traditional drawing, and I've really over the years fallen in love with it. But I see a benefit to digital in terms of being able to explore different colors without a supplies waste, and then be able to transfer that and paint it in oils or acrylics if you want. But they definitely go hand in hand, and I'm really happy that I've been able to do both. I
just want to bring this one up for two reasons. Number one, I just recently watched The Mandalorian, and I loved the series.
Nice.
So I see a fellow Star Wars fan here. But if my 2-year-old daughter took her Etch-a-Sketch and like popped this out, I would be like, Oh my, yes. Look at this.
Yes, Mickey Mouse, my fave.
So we're getting into my, as an artist, I do more than combat art, of course, right? I have a freelance career I do animation and portrait work and all kinds of things. And then this is something I have a pretty good following on TikTok, where I get a lot of younger audience, and I teach art on there. And one thing I started doing was these 30-second videos of drawing on these old kids' toys, and it took off. Like, one of my first videos got like 9 million views, and it was just a little 30-second video of a little character. So I like to do these every now and then just for fun, and people like it because, again, they can relate to it. They're like, oh, we used these toys growing up.
Yeah, but nobody used them like this.
Yeah, I didn't either. I found it in a drawer one day, and I was like, oh, this is fun. Like, I'm gonna draw on this, and it just
this is that wonderful what were they, the memes from years ago, where there'd be 6 different pictures. It'd be like, when I do art, this is what my mom thinks I'm doing, what my boyfriend thinks I'm doing, and then
what I'm actually doing.
This is what I think I'm doing, and what I'm actually doing is some, like, stick figure thing.
Yeah, they're really fun. And for anyone watching, if you lack confidence or you rely heavily on like an eraser or something, I say you either draw with colored Prismacolors that don't erase, or use one of these, because if you want to do another one, you have to get rid of it. So it's just a fun little thing.
And then my last question about this, because this has nothing to do with Marine Corps, but how do you do this and then not just go buy another Fisher-Price one so that you can keep this? Because you have to erase it, and that's got to be a little bit painful.
Yeah, I think I've learned over the years that, I don't love every drawing, and I'm very easy to just like toss it and do another one. I've been known to erase whole drawings and start over again. So it's easy for me to be like, okay, it's just for fun. There's something nice about it's kind of like running without a watch for anyone. If you rely heavily on your watch when you're out on a run, you kind of lose that connection to the run. And so sometimes you go out without a watch and you just go run. It's the same thing. Like, at the end you're gonna have to erase the drawing. So it's just nice and kind of less stressful in a way.
I love that. You got to relax into what you love every now and again, right?
Yes.
Even I'd imagine people who are enlisted would tell you that, or you would feel that way. Like, when you get those moments to relax, you got to take them in life, right?
Yes, 100%. A lot of something that I think holds back people from pursuing art is like every time they put the pencil on the paper, they think it has to be the most perfect drawing they've ever done. And so maybe that does stem back to combat art and learning that not every drawing is going to be a masterpiece, and you just have to keep going and keep working through that. And every 100 drawings, you'll get one winner. So
I can think of no better note to end on here, but Elise, really, just an awesome conversation to have with you. I really appreciate, both of us, Catherine and I both really appreciate your time, you and Chris. I hope that all of our listeners get a chance to go visit the museum, see more of your art, visit your Instagram and your TikTok. You're an incredible talent, which I'm so happy to use this platform to share with our audience and more. So best of luck to you as you continue your career throughout all of this crazy world.
Yes. Yeah, who knows where I'll be in 10 years, or like, you'll have to loop back around and see what's going on. I'll always be in the combat artist program, but things change every year. It's crazy. It's
totally,
fun,
especially for storytellers.
Yeah.
Just, we are finding different ways to tell stories, and there's never a shortage of them.
Yeah, for sure.
And to our listeners, please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube, follow us, send me a link, an email, Shaun, SHAUN at veteransbreakfastclub.org. Go visit the websites. Please check it all out. And thank you to our sponsors, D&D Auto Salvage and Tobacco Free Adagio Health. Thank you always to our sponsors for helping us out in producing this podcast. Elise, hopefully we get the chance in 10 years to loop back around.
That's right. Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, guys.